Well, hello everybody. This is Ralph Fletcher, and this is Writing with Ralph. I'm glad that you're here with me. Um, we're going to be talking about writing and all the different things that we can think about to make writing really come alive. And my friend Ellen Keene, who some of the teachers might know of, she's written some wonderful books for teachers on literacy. She wrote me an email. Instead of calling it Writing with Ralph, she called it at the bottom Writing with Ralph. And you know that the W can be silent in letters, right? In words like wrinkled or wrapping. So the advantage of that would be that you'd have three W's in a row, Writing with Ralph. And so I'm not sure. I can't tell if it's really a cool idea or maybe it's kind of a silly idea or maybe it's both. And maybe a bit of silliness isn't such a bad thing these days. Still pretty raw here in New Hampshire. They say that March comes in like a lion and out like a lamb. Well, we're still waiting for the lamb to show up, but it's happening slowly, I think, that we're having some warmer days, and some of the days even peak into the high 40s or low 50s. We've been starting by reading a poem or so I'm going to read a poem of mine. This is kind of a playful poem. It's called just called Scary Poem. And I just thought it'd be fun to share this with you guys. Scary poem. Hope it doesn't give you nightmares. Scary poem. One poem frightens me from the first simile. Each metaphor strikes fear to my core. I'm deeply disturbed by one evil verb. The rhymes of this verse makes me fear the worse. No use pretending, I dread the ending. And that is a scary poem. Never been published, but I kind of like that one. I don't, a lot of my poems do not rhyme, but this one does. Now, you may remember last time, if you were with me last time, at the end of this session, I read my piece of The Good Old Days, and I invited the viewers to ride the wave of my poem and maybe borrow the first two lines and the last two lines. So you'd start off something. Sometimes I remember the good old days, and you'd add your own memory, and then you'd end it. I still can't imagine anything better than that. Well, I received a lot of emails from kids who sent me their poems, and actually some from adults also. And I thought I'd just share one with you guys. This is a piece that was written by a second grader named Madeline. And I'm going to put my glasses on just so I can read it properly. Sometimes I remember the good old days, petting Frank the dog with my cousins, baking brownie cookies with my mom, playing pool and air hockey with my brother, even though he always wins, going in the monkey bars and doing tricks for hours. My backyard becomes my habitat. It makes me feel active and free. I still can't imagine anything better than that. I think that's lovely, and I really love that line. My backyard becomes my habitat. Very, very interesting. Well, great. So you remember, just to recap, when we got together last time, we talked about the power of the writer's notebook. I think of the writer's notebook as a high comfort, low risk place to write, and it's a place where I can just be myself, and I can play with language and goof around and collect seed ideas and think out things that are kind of troubling to me. And I also mentioned, if you remember from last session, the idea of the stealth notebook, which is small enough to just put in your pocket and away you go. Hey guys, I have to say it again. You need one of these. You got to get one. It's just a valuable thing to have, and you'll find it a great way to collect the idea that comes up to you at any odd time and you don't want to remember it. I just want to say that one of my mentors was a man named Don Murray, and Don used to say, he said, I write for 2 hours every day, but it's what I do the other 22 hours that allows me to do that writing. So what you're doing and what you're thinking when you're not writing also feeds into your writing. Well, the writer's notebook allows you to be a writer all the time during the day when something pops up in your head and you say, I want to remember that because everybody has ideas, everybody has thoughts of a story or maybe a song or a movie they want to make, but the writer does something extra. The writer takes that moment and writes it down. And you remember last time I talked about how I got that idea for "With invisible arms, the dawn erases the blackboard of stars," and how that became the seed for my book, Twilight Comes Twice. And I just want to say that when I write down a line that I think is pretty good in my notebook, I feel like I'm rich. I feel like I've got a kind of wealth because I've got something that's really valuable. Okay. So there's no one way to keep a notebook. You can do, some people love to doodle and sketch. One of the things that I like to do is I like to write down memorable quotes, things that people say. I remember one time my brother Jim was talking about baseball, which is like my favorite sport. And Jim said to me, Ralph, baseball's not a sport. It's a form of national meditation. A form of national meditation. Well, I don't agree with that, but I think that's really funny. And I see his point. Baseball can be sort of slow sometimes. So I wrote that in my notebook so I didn't forget it. I was looking through my notebooks, and I found that one day one of my kids said to me, I remember I was going to read a book to one of my kids, and my son said to me, "No, you can't read that one today, Daddy. We read that one yesterday. We read that one yesterday." And you see what he did? He combined the word yesterday with the word the last day, and he made his own word yesterday. And I wrote that in my notebook because I wanted to remember that. I love to play with words. And many writers would tell you the same thing. My friend Chris Crutcher, who is a YA novelist, says that when I write, my word radar comes up. My word radar. I love that. Everybody's got a word radar, even little kids. I'll tell you a story. So it was the summertime, and I was at a park. It was like a cookout, and there was a bunch of grills going. They were cooking, burgers and stuff like that. And there were kids running around and dogs. And there was a little boy who was about, I think, maybe 3 years old. And he was sitting down eating some watermelon, I think. And a dog flopped down next to him, and the dog was kind of like panting. You know how dogs do that? They'll stick their tongue out, and the dog was panting. And the little boy looked at the dog and said, "That's a hot dog." And then he went, because he realized that when you say a hot dog, there's another meaning for hot dog, right? Or the hot dog that we put in a bun with some mustard and we eat. So that boy's word radar kicked in, and he realized that that word had another meaning. I think that, it's good to know what words mean. It's good to expand your vocabulary. Every writer wants to have a rich vocabulary so you can express what you want to say. And that comes from reading a lot and writing a lot. But it's also good not just to know the exact meaning for words, sometimes just to kind of be playful with words. One boy I know, a relative, he loves the science museum. So he went there, and he made a beeline to the astronomy room. And when he came out, I said to him, "What's your favorite planet?" And he said to me, very seriously, he said, "Pluvis." And I said, "What? Say again?" And he said, "I love the planet Pluvis." And I realized that he had created a planet by combining the word Pluto, which actually is not even a planet anymore, right? That's last time I looked. He combined Pluvis with Venus. So Pluto plus Venus equals Pluvis. That cracked me up. I definitely wrote that in my writer's notebook. And maybe someday I'll write something about the planet Pluvis. Probably not, but I think that it's one of those things that I might write about at some point. And I like to write, to play with language when I write myself. I was writing a poem about something this is from my book, Have You Been to the Beach Lately? This book is out of print, but one of my favorite books. And I used to have a lot of memories of going to the beach with my brothers and sisters and my parents. And one of the things that we loved to do was my brothers and sisters and I would just kind of go in with the shallow waves and just let the waves kind of roll over you. So I wrote a poem called Wallowing, and you're going to notice in this poem that I kind of invented some words, or I used some words in some unusual ways. Wallowing. We walk on our hands and laze in shallow surf, like a bunch of sea sloths or slow motion manatees. No place to go, no hurry to get there, wobbling with the bubbles, foaming with the froth, in the noisy crumble tumble of the ragamuffin waves. Let me read you the last 4 lines of that together. Maybe we can look at this when I read it. Wobbling with the bubbles, foaming with the froth, in the noisy crumble tumble of the ragamuffin waves. Now, obviously, the word wobbling is not a word. I just invented that. And even a ragamuffin is like unkempt, and it's not really a word that you'd think about connecting to waves, but I used it in a playful way. So I like doing that all the time. Um, do you have any really zany words that you like a lot? I do. I just am always like finding cool words and writing them down. And some of the words I realize that I know what they mean and I understand them when I read them, but I never use them in my writing. So I'm trying to move them from reading words into writing words. But for example, I love the word gobsmacked, which means astounded or amazed. He was gobsmacked. And then there's another word called when people are having a big argument or a big fight, they had a brouhaha. Ha. And I just think that that's funny that that's a word. It's one of my favorite words, brouhaha. So if you have somebody in your family who's made up a funny word or just a favorite word of yourself, I'd love to hear about it. And here's my email address. I guess probably you should either get your parents' permission or maybe have them email me. It's probably not a good idea just to start emailing an adult that you haven't met before. But I'd love to just to hear those if you have any words that you want to collect. But so let's now make a shift now from me to you, like we did last time. Let's start thinking about writing. Writers can write about things that are big. Like, I don't know, civil rights and racism, or something small, and you can write about something that's serious or playful, like the planet Plutus. And I want to read a section from my memoir, Marshfield Dreams, when I was a kid. My brother Jimmy, this is a chapter called School. I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I'm going to read some of it, though. He loved the woods, and when I went to school, he's the second oldest. I'm the oldest of a big family, so he's the second oldest. And so what he would do is, when I got off the bus, well, let's read. I'll read you this part of it. When I got off the bus, he had a small animal skull in his hands, and he gave it to me. What is it? I think it's a beaver, he said. It's too big to be a cat. I found the bones in the woods. It's for you. The next day when I stepped off the bus, he gave me an old wasp nest. Every day, as soon as I get off that bus, he'd hand me some treasure he'd found in the woods. I knew Jimmy would be going to school soon, and I was worried about him. I tried to get him ready for it. It's not like home, I said. You've got to follow the rules or you'll get in trouble. What rules? Like, you can't talk whenever you want, I explained. You raise your hand if you want to say something. Okay? Okay. This is serious, I told him. Do you know the Pledge of Allegiance? The what? He asked. I made him stand with me in the kitchen, put his hand in his heart, and pledge allegiance to an imaginary flag on the wall. He groaned and rolled his eyes. Listen, they say the pledge every morning, so you've got to know it. You've got to know it by heart, I said. You better learn it now. The following September, the big day finally came. Jimmy held my hand and giggled nervously when the bus arrived. We ran up the stairs together, and Jimmy sat on the edge of his seat all the way to school. When we got there, a woman met us and pinned a paper circle to his shirt. My brother shot me one last look before the lady led him away. That day I spotted Jimmy only once, walking in a line with other kids headed into the cafeteria. In the woods, he always knew exactly where he was, but standing in that noisy cafeteria with his freckles and thick glasses and colicky hair, Jimmy looked lost. When he got off the bus that afternoon, he went straight to the woods. I didn't see him again till supper time. That night, I asked Jimmy if he liked school. Boring. He didn't want to talk about it. And that's the way it was for him every day. He'd come home and go straight to the woods. He didn't even wait to change out of his school clothes or eat a snack. School was fine for a kid like me because I knew how to shut up and listen, but it seemed wrong to take an outside kid like Jimmy and lock him inside 6 hours a day. They should have had a different kind of school for Jimmy. Maybe a place with acres of unexplored woods and streams and swamps and steep rocky cliffs where we could spend hours making forts or digging for fossils and animal bones. In November, we got report cards. I sneaked a peek at Jimmy's. His grades were lower than mine, a lot lower, which didn't make any sense. I knew that Jimmy was smarter than me, but on that report card, there was no grade for knowing where snakes sleep in the heat of the day, for being able to tell the difference between the skull of a cat or a beaver, a salamander or a mud puppy. It wasn't fair, but I told myself that the woods would always be the place where Jimmy learned best. In that school, he would always be a straight A student. And I'll read you the last couple lines of that piece just at the end here. I knew that Jimmy was smarter than me, but in that report card there was no grade for knowing where snakes sleep in the heat of the day, for being able to tell the difference between the skull of a cat or a beaver, a salamander or a mud puppy. It wasn't fair, but I told myself that the woods would always be the place where Jimmy learned best. In that school, he would always be a straight A student. So what I want you to think about is, how about you? Where are you a straight A student? And I'm thinking about someplace out of school, although it could be school. Maybe you're just a whiz at math, but I'm really kind of interested in some non-academic area that you feel like you're a straight A student. You're just like an expert on it. And it might be on the skateboard. I'll just give you some ideas that you might think about to get the juices flowing. It might be braiding your sister's hair. Maybe you're just really good at that. Maybe babysitting your little brother. Or maybe you're really, really good at making the family laugh during a tense situation, like cracking up the whole family. That's a skill some kids have, and that is another way to be a straight A student. So what I'm really saying is that a lot of times, school values a certain kinds of things. Kids who can read and write and do math and, all that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people who just find that their expertise is outside of those subjects. Maybe it's repairing your car, your dad's car with him, and those are the kind of things that by the way, I can't do that at all. I was pretty good at school, but I wasn't so good at the that kind of handyman's kind of stuff. So I would love to see you write about that. Maybe you can see if in your notebook or in a piece of paper you could write a page, half a page. But I'd love to just hear where you're a straight A student. So, and remember, I would love to encourage you to send me an email, and I'll try to respond to your writing, which I've done most of the kids that have sent me stuff because it hasn't been too much, and maybe if we get permission from your parents, we could even possibly read some of these pieces out loud during my next Writing with Ralph session. So that's kind of the end of our time together. We read some poems. We talked about the Writer's Notebook again and the Stealth Notebook, and we talked a lot about wordplay and how writers love to play with language. And I hope that your word radar is turned on. I just had a thought that popped into my head. I was doing an author visit at a school, and I have a big photograph I wanted to put up on this easel, but we didn't have one in the library. And I asked the librarian, I said, do you have an easel here? And she said to me, no, but we could get you one easily. Get it? Easily. And then she laughed, because it actually wasn't a pun that she'd planned, but sometimes the best kind of like wordplay are things that just happen at the spur of the moment. And it's nice to celebrate that. So, and I hope that you'll also maybe take some time to do some writing. Just if I was a doctor, which I'm not, but I would prescribe you getting a writer's notebook and writing something every day. It just could be a sentence or two, a paragraph, or more if you want. But I'd love to hear you play around with the idea, like where are you a straight A student, and what does that feel like? Not just like what do you do, but how does it feel inside when you're so good at something? What's going through your mind, and how does it feel in your heart? All right. Well, thank you very much. It was great to spend these 20 minutes with you guys. Happy writing, and I will see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.